and I did it because I'm also an Emmanuel person, which I mean, I wasn't, but I ended up, I taught there for just 2 years full, and then I think I subbed for another year. And I just haven't had much time to do any subbing since. I know, I'm sorry, because I do love it. Should we go ahead and get started?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, let me introduce myself. So my name is Trudy Sirkis. I was a little bit of history on me. I work for Beaver Camp, which is a Jewish summer camp in McWanago, Wisconsin. Great camp. And I love this. This is really awkward. Hi, to me. So anyway, I've been working there. This is my 25th summer. So I started there as their camp social worker. So that was my background. I was 13 years. I was the middle school counselor at MJDS. I taught at Sinai for many years, at Shalom for many years, and for a few years at Emmanuel. So come on in. Come join us. Sippy called and asked me if I could, wait, I think I'm missing things. Hold on, I might want to. Oh, I guess in my work at Beaver Camp, one of the things I've done for many years, even though I had different roles now, but even when I wasn't the social worker, I worked with our homesick kids a lot, which I think of that as being anxiety and trauma, big time for them. So I feel like I have quite a bit of experience, but in researching for this, I learned so much more than I ever would have thought. And if anybody who knows saw that I posted on Facebook that I was doing the presentation, and my oldest daughter responded and said, "We're learning about this now," and she's a elementary school music education teacher in the Greendale School District. So that was kind of cool. So then she sent me some amazing links that I had wasn't even aware of. So let's see how I do this. I have no idea. Did I see that? Okay. So what I'm going to do is, sorry. First up, don't look at that yet. I just want you to take this because some people ask, if you have specific questions, anything that you're hoping I'm going to cover today, I just want you to write that so that if I can look at these, even if I look at them after and I see that I didn't cover something, if I don't cover it, I can at least give you resources for it or help point you in the right direction. So if you don't mind putting your name on it, if you want me to be able to respond to it, that would be great.
Or you can respond to me and I'll forward it.
Or yeah, so you don't, either way. So you don't have to put your name on if you want, but I'm going to pass that out. Does anybody else need a pen? If you'll take those and pass them down. Thanks. And hi, I'm Trudy, and you're?
I'm Carrie Barber, Constable.
Hi, Carrie Barber, Constable.
I am the Education Director at Congregation Emmanuel of Waukesha.
Sure, wow, big trip, okay.
But I don't live out in Waukesha.
Oh, good.
And I also work at Anti Sparkula here in Glendale.
So what do you do for them?
I'm their administrator.
Oh, okay, great, well, welcome. So, were you here when I did who I was? Introduced my name again? I'm Trudy Sirkis. Did I do that? Were you here?
I was here when you were checking in at the desk.
Oh, that was you helping me? No, was it? That's so funny. Thank you. Okay, so tonight we're gonna talk about what is now termed ACE, which is Adverse Childhood Experience. And it's a really common term that I never even was aware of, to be honest, when I dealt with anxiety and trauma. And in my research, I learned a ton. But you can find, if you just Google ACE in the classroom, ACE in anything, you will get so much research information. And a lot of it is on the CDC. And I will give you information later and let you, if you want information from me, you can, I'm happy to share some of the resources. But basically, in studying this, what I learned is that 61%, so they did a big survey. There was actually a really huge one in the late 1990s, where they followed people and found out information about them. And this was really researching people who had experienced an ACE, which I'm going to talk about what that is, during childhood, and then they saw the impact in adulthood. Does that make sense? So we're going to look at that a little bit. So in one of the sources I found reported that one that 61% of adults had experienced one ACE during childhood, and 1 in 6 reported having 4 or more types of ACEs. And in another report, 1 in 4, 25% reported 3 or more types of ACEs. So we are going to talk about what those are. So nearly half of all children in the U.S., almost 35 million kids, have experienced at least 1 or more types of serious childhood trauma. So we're going to define a little bit about what that means today, but and talk about how they look at it. But one of the things I think that's really important for us is, as we look at what's technically an ACE, is recognizing that we get traumatized by things that may not even fit in the categories that they get. There are things that happen to kids that may not be up there, but that could cause trauma in another way. And also it depends on the person. And we're going to talk a little bit at the end about how your experiences impact how you're able to cope with different types of ACEs. So my goal tonight is really not to spend too much time on, I'm not going to spend any time on recognizing trauma, because what I really want to do is give you tools on working with kids who may have had trauma, and we'll talk about some of the behaviors you might see that would make you think they might have had trauma, but also to know that as with almost everything we teach about working with kids who have some kind of a special need, every good teaching practice is good for everybody. Does that make sense? So,
Absolutely.
so that's really my goal, is to talk about strategies that will be effective with them, but are just good teaching strategies anyway. And the other thing I want us to think about is to think about, if we only thought of every child as if they had a trauma, would we treat them differently? And would we be better teachers because of that? So the reason I say that is just to share a little. Does anybody watch on Netflix? There's a new show called Virgin River. Okay, it's not like a great show, but I got a little hooked. But anyway, it keeps flashing back in all these different characters to the traumas that happened in their lives that none of them in interacting with each other know about. And I don't know if anybody saw, this was several years ago, it went viral. It was like an ad or something where it took people, were looking at somebody and then you saw what they were thinking and you had no idea that they were dealing with the awful things that they were dealing with. And all you saw was the way they acted or whatever it was, and we would get impatient or not really recognizing the importance of recognizing that we don't know anybody's trauma. We don't know what people are going through, and we can only assume that everybody has baggage. Everybody has something going on in their lives that impacts how they behave. So
It's like the show This Is Us. Do you know that show?
So that's another one where
Showing, how the childhood has affected their adulthood. And
yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yes, it goes back. Yes, that's another one. Absolutely. There's actually, I have a whole bunch of different ones to talk about. Okay. So what is trauma? So first of all, by the way, the CDC study that I mentioned, it's one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse, neglect, and household changes, and later life, health, and well-being. So it's one of the biggest studies out there that you can research. So fun. I get to say, hi, Aggie, how are you? There was a woman this weekend that just like this.
Excuse me.
Every time I see her, I think it's
That woman, we were all going, that looks like it. Okay, so there are 8 categories. According to one resource, there are 8 categories. I'm going to actually use 2 different resources to help you look at the different kinds of trauma. But the trauma,
Can I
and
stop one more time? Are you going to send this PowerPoint to me so I can send it to them?
I can.
Because then you guys don't have to worry about
That would
putting
be
notes in
so
there.
much
Absolutely.
nicer.
I purposely did not do printed
You're welcome to
because
take notes.
paper, right, because paper just gets lost, and I'm happy to send this out. And because truthfully, all you'd have to do is hit a Google question on this, and this is all going to come up. So, and the other thing is, while I'm mostly focusing on trauma causes anxiety. And the way we treat kids who have anxiety, even who don't have a trauma, is still the same. Does that make sense? So,
Say that again.
so that trauma is trauma can cause anxiety, which makes sense. But also, people who have anxiety not related to a trauma the way you treat them is really the same. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than sharing maybe a couple of small stories about my own daughter who has anxiety, but not spend a lot of time on that specifically. So these are the 8 categories that they're looking at. A threat to life or limb, actual severe physical harm or injury, including sexual assault, which means being exposed to it. Receipt of intentional injury and harm, so actually having it happen to them. Exposure to the grotesque, and I love that they write that without explaining what that means, but we can all imagine what that could mean.
I've never seen it written that way. It's
So
great.
interesting. Violent, sudden loss of a loved one. And interesting to me that they wrote violent sudden loss, because I think it's violent and or sudden. I don't think it has to be violence. It doesn't necessarily have to be what brought that on. Witnessing or learning of violence to a loved one, learning of exposure to a noxious agent, and also not clear on what that means, what that meant for somebody, and causing death or severe harm to another. So this is just one set of categories that they use. But you're actually going to get to take a little quiz that NPR has. So there is a quiz, which we're not going to take just yet, but I am going to read you, just to give you an idea of some of the things that they're looking for. They're talking about neglect, being humiliated. So some of the things that we talked that are in those 8. And so when I read them, we're going to go back and I'm going to actually let you take the quiz. I'm going to read it out loud to you. And then you're just going to, on your note card or piece of paper, write down for yourself how that feels for you and what your score is. Okay. And then the last thing I want to talk about trauma is just that to be really careful that we aren't defining, even with all the traumas that you can research, that we don't necessarily define what is traumatic for somebody. But that is up to the person to determine what is traumatic to them. So anyway, so yes.
Is our definition of trauma this evening those 8 categories?
It is, and then this quiz for right now, for the most part. But I'm not giving that's to give you an overview of what kinds of things would be defined as trauma. But you could imagine other things, and those would be acceptable. So, so there are 3 types of ACEs that I found in research. I hope you can see that. One is different kinds of abuse: physical, emotional, and social. Neglect, physical and emotional, right? Wrong glasses. And household dysfunction, mental illness in the household, incarcerated relatives, I have it in front of me. Mother treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. So that's not exactly what was in those 8 categories either. So this is another definition and a way to look at, and the physical, emotional, and sexual with the abuse, the 3 different kinds of abuse. So those are other types of ACEs. So you can see that people look at ACEs in different ways. This one's a little more encompassing, I think, of things we could think about or imagine. So the impact, I want to talk a little bit about that. The impact for kids who have experienced some kind of trauma, it impacts, no surprise to any of you, that they could be distracted. There's classroom learning. Their ability to learn, they could be distracted, withdrawn. This is a really big one. Misdiagnosed as ADD and ADHD. It impacts their ability to function in social environments. It impacts their ability to manage emotions. They can be aggressive, skittish, impulsive, fearful. There are physiological symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, all of those kinds of things. And there are brain changes. They actually have documented, and you can pull this up also, and actually see pictures of the brain that I don't understand what it looks like. I just understand that they're different. I see the picture of the normal brain, and I see the picture of the other one, but because I'm not much in terms of brain research, don't necessarily understand.
Are those permanent changes?
So yeah, I think they are. So you're dealing with those and helping somebody cope with that, but yes.
The number of kids who have trauma might really explain a lot about why we see so many more cases of ADHD than
Diagnosed with ADHD,
diagnosed,
right.
Might not be, but like
Right,
diagnosed.
absolutely. And if you think about even how they did the research in the late 90s and the trauma kids have seen since then,
Oh yeah.
like is understandable.
And the study shows that the brain actually changes.
Right. It shows brain changes from, and it's actually based on abuse that they found those. So the impact, the bigger impact, not just for kids, I kind of gave you the impact on students, but the impact for adults goes into their behaviors, like a physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work, their physical and mental health. Obesity is tied to trauma, diabetes is tied, depression is tied, suicide attempts, sexually transmitted diseases, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD is, I can't think of the word, somebody say it for me. It's your lungs. I just can't think of the word for it. And broken bones. So those are impacts that go beyond just what you might think you'd see in the classroom, but also what happens to them as they become adults. So there is, so that's the long-term effects. Here's the really good news. This is the coolest part of it all. One caring, safe relationship can make a difference in a child's ability to grow up healthy. Well, this is huge because that puts it all on us to be able to make a difference that we might know or might not know that we could make for a child. And we're going to talk a little bit and look at our own experiences and failures. The other thing is that resilience and close relationships are the key. So resilience is interesting because that's more about your own innate ability to have that resilience. Do you know what I mean? That people have resilience in them innately, or they build it up, they get skills, which is what we're going to talk about later, and then developing those close relationships are really critical. So we're going to talk in a minute about strategies that mitigate. I'm missing something. We're going to go back to that one. We're going to talk about strategies, and in a minute we're just going to watch a quick video. It's so funny, for those people that know me, I've also done a lot of love and logic work and love and logic parenting.
Jim Fay?
So it's his son, Charles Fay, which is a great story about him anyway. I've seen him in person many times, talked to him in person. I'll be honest, when you watch this video, we're going to watch it for a second. We're going to stop. We're going to take the quiz first and come back to it. But when we do, I'm just going to say that it's not my favorite video of him. I find him, it's just for me personally, but what he says is really good. So if you can get beyond the fact that you might find him, I don't know if he's patronizing or condescending or what it feels like, go beyond that and just listen to the content because that part's good. But before we do that, actually, I'm going to have you actually take the quiz. So I'm going to read questions. You're going to put a number and then a yes or a no. That's all you're going to do. Okay. And this is totally for you to just see the kinds of things. And this quiz is actually there's an NPR website that this came from. And so after we do this, I'll share with you a little bit more. So number one, you're just going to say yes or no to this. Did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often do any of the following? Swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Let's put a Y or an N. Question number two. Did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Just a Y or an N. Number three, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Number four, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Number five, am I going fast enough or not too slow? Not too fast. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat or had to wear dirty clothes and had no one to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Number six, were your parents ever separated or divorced?
Could you say that again?
Number six, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Number seven, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or was ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife. So basically the question, did you see any violence or anything happen to your mother or stepmother? And I would add, or anybody in your home. Question number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And last question is, these are 10 questions, did a household member go to prison? Yes or no? So now, and I don't want you to share it, and I'm hoping that this doesn't make anybody walk out upset, as you tally for yourself what numbers you get. But think before about when I talked about the 61% who said that they had experienced at least one ACE. And these are the questions that they're really referring to. What are the things that could have happened? And think that 1 in 6 people had 3 or 4 or more, and 1 in 4 people had 3 or more of these. So that's how they define trauma. Now, how it impacts you is going to be, it's going to depend on a number of things, like the support you have, like your own resilience, like the relationships and people that you have as well. So we're going to come back to that. So we're going to watch the little clip.
So fun to browse in.
So this is the other annoying thing now.
Seeing everything. It's just hello.
It interrupts even with
Hi,
that.
this is Dr. Charles Fay here at the Love and Logic Institute. Since your heart everyone's great for the kids in your community that have been hurt, and you know what I'm talking about. We see so many kids nowadays who've experienced abuse, neglect, and other forms of trauma, and they come into our homes and they come to our classrooms. So we work with them. I'm talking to you, and you are parents, foster parents, adopted parents, social workers, psychologists, teachers, special ed teachers, administrators, people who love kids. And you see these kids, and are they easy to work with? No. And do they act out? Some of them act out so much that we ask ourselves, how are we going to reach this kid? And others act in. They act in and they go, they disassociate, and they kind of go to a different place in their heart to escape the pain. So people often ask me, Charles, is there any hope for these kids? And I say, absolutely. I want to tell you a story about Brian. And I met Brian many years ago when I was a younger psychologist, and I remember going to this special school, a school for kids with severe emotional and behavioral problems. And I met Brian, and right away, without saying anything else to me, he called me a couple names that would make a sailor blush. He didn't even know me. I thought, what do you do about that? I remember a great psychiatrist I worked with when I was working in a psych hospital said, give them the unexpected response. And what's the unexpected response with a kid who is acting out towards you? Well, maybe it might be being calm or being empathetic, or maybe using a little loving humor. And I think I just acted like it didn't happen and moved on, which frustrated him a little bit. But who knows what else I could have done. But I had an opportunity to go observe Brian. There was this wonderful setup at the school where they had a one-way mirror, and you could look through there and watch the kids in the classroom. And I'm peering through that mirror, and I see Brian. He's got a stapler open, and he's chasing his young teacher across the room. He's trying to staple her arm, and I don't know if that is something that most teachers are prepared to handle, especially first-year teachers. And Love and Logic is dedicated to giving people specific skills, not just theory. So I went to Amy. Amy was her name, and I said, Amy, would you like to experiment with something? And she said, what? I said, well, there's 3 things that these kids really need. And we can overcomplicate it, or we can get simple. And I said, first thing they need is relationships. They need empirical proof that they can be loved, even when they act out. So I said to her, here's some things that you can do. Greet him at the door. She was great at the greeting. Eye contact, smile, and touch, the cues of attachment and bonding. And she's like, oh, Brian, it's so good to see you. And she'd even say things like, oh, Brian, it's so good to see you. And great thing about having you in my class is I never know what's going to happen. It's so exciting. And she just put a positive bent on everything. And are you guessing that really frustrated Brian? It frustrated him because any time somebody had gotten close to him, he got hurt. And so what's the natural response? Protect yourself. Fight against his teacher even harder. I warned him. I said, don't be surprised if he gets a little bit worse when you're leaning in and really loving him in these ways. And she got really good at reframing it in her mind. This is not about me. And foster parents, as that wise remember as well, this is not about me. This behavior is about past trauma. This behavior is about all the hurt that's built up inside this kid. This behavior is about this kid trying to survive and not really believing that they're in a safe environment. We know they're safe with us. They don't know they're safe with us. What do you do when you're fearing for your life? Anything you can do to survive. And so Amy was great at the relationship part. And that's the first piece of what I call the triad of hope. And the second part are boundaries. Do kids need boundaries? Do all kids need boundaries? How about kids who've been around a lot of adults who don't have boundaries? Kids who've been hurt. Oh, yeah. A lot of these kids don't know where they begin or where they end. And they need somebody to model safety. Don't limits help us feel safe. And Amy was really great at keeping things really predictable in the classroom and really good boundaries. And the boundaries are about what we do, what we allow, rather than bossing the kid around. So, I allow kids to play with that or use that item as long as it's not being thrown. Or I listen to kids when their voice is calm. Or I allow kids to sit when they like, as long as they're not hitting people nearby. Those sorts of things. And so, first of all, the triad of hope. I've only had 2 of them so far. Brian got love. And I'm going to say, love heals the brain. The second thing that Brian got was safety, the safety of limits. Oh, this person cares enough about me to provide these boundaries, even when I push back hard, right? See, Amy was good at saying it's not about me. Say it again, it's not about us. It's about that past trauma. And the third part of the triad of hope is the kid gets to see that they're good. Now, I can tell a kid who's been hurt that they're good all day long. Will they believe me? No. But what happens if I can help this kid see that they are good firsthand? And Ryan was pretty good at hassling her, but she was even better at being empathetic and saying, "Oh, Brian, that really drained my energy when you did that. And Brian, how are you going to put that energy back in me?" And Brian would do things for her to put her energy back in. It really wasn't a consequence. It was an opportunity for Brian to see that he was good and capable of solving problems. And he'd help her grade papers. And he'd just sit there and hand her the papers. And she'd smile at him and say, "Oh, Brian, this is just so helpful. And I can feel the energy coming back into me right now." And I've known foster parents, all different types of people use that approach where kid causes a problem, causes an energy drain, they can do some good things for you, they bond with you when they're doing good things, and guess what? Irrefutable evidence to them that they're good. See, how do we help a kid build their self-concept? Get them doing some good things so that they can see themselves doing good. It's pretty hard when you're a kid to argue with that kind of data. Okay. well, things are going a little bit better. He's still trying to staple her. You know, he'd like to try to staple her with a stapler, but now his efforts were just kind of lackluster. She smiled at me and she said, one day she said, yeah, I think it's really working. Because he still does those things, but you can kind of tell there's no intensity to it. It's like he just can't build up to a real good rebellion anymore. And she said the biggest change has been in my heart. She was wise enough to recognize that. She said, I realized that even though he acts out still, and even though it's gonna take years of love to rebuild or to build up his heart and heal his brain, I'm just not so mad about it anymore. In fact, I just like him. I said, you like Brian, even though he staples you? And she said, I love Brian, and she loved him. She absolutely fell in love with him. I remember the last day of school, and the bell rings, and the kids are all escaping out of the school. I can remember those days, escaping on the last day of school. And here's Brian, and he goes to run out of the building to his foster parents, and then he comes to a screeching halt. His sneakers just squeak on the floor, and he makes a quick U-turn, and he runs into the building, and he jumps on Amy. He jumps on his teacher. It was a love jump. He just kind of launched up, and he affixed himself like a postage stamp to her, and he hugged her so tight. And she said he whispered in my ear, oh, I'm gonna miss you during the summer. And he cried. And Amy said, you know, I know it's important to have good boundaries, but you know what? I cried just a little bit of a tear too, because I worked so hard with him and I fell in love with him. And I sent him little notes during the summer saying, I'm thinking of you. And is that life changing? When somebody loves you, even when you're really hard to love. And so the triad of hope is loving relationships, good solid boundaries, and kid being able to see themselves being successful. But love and logic.
Okay, so I hope that the information was useful. And I also want to say that I normally wouldn't just sit here and talk like this, but I typed at this computer. I don't have one of those clickers that you can just change the pages. So anyway, so I want to go to, let me go, oh, right here, next page. So here's a triangle of hope. Oh, good, they're there. The culture of love, setting boundaries, and helping them see the good in themselves. And those are, that's what he's talking about. And I think it's a really interesting way to think about this. None of these things are easy to do with kids, because I was picturing this kid with a stapler. Could you imagine yourself not freaking out, moving beyond that and not consequencing just for that, but just focusing on providing love and letting him know he's good, but still having boundaries in some way that work. So keep that as a way to think about it. And then also the other thing that kind of breaks my heart a little is we can work so hard with a kid and get somebody through a year, but we don't get them again. And they start all over. So imagine the kid who finally has a relationship with a teacher. And so I love that that teacher wrote a notes during the year, and that there are teachers that stay in touch with kids still. And so to really think about how you're going to do that, none of this is easy. I also find it really interesting for me, and let me make sure this is where I want to go before I jump too far ahead. Yeah. So I find to me it's really interesting because the teachers that kids love are not necessarily what we think of as the nicest teachers. They're often the strictest teachers, and they have figured out how to set boundaries, but somehow kids love them because or else kids tolerate them and don't complain about them because they can feel the love. And I'm going to give an example of a teacher that I worked with many years, and I was always blown away by that. The other thing I want to talk to you about first is, anybody read Educated or Where the Crawdads Sing?
Where the what?
Where the Crawdads Sing. Both, you read both of them? They're both amazing books. I just happened to read the two of them. Educated. So Educated is a book by a woman who grew up as a Mormon. Not the Mormon that she lived, the Mormon experience she lived is not a typical Mormon experience. It was her family took it to a level that was not necessarily what it should have been. So anyway, so she talks about her and her experiences and the trauma that she experienced all through her life. And the funny thing about this for me is that I just happened to read both these books like right after Sippy called me and asked me if I could do this. And things happen and you go, oh my gosh, it ties right in. So that's what happened with Educated Us. I was reading that going, oh my gosh, here's a person who still somehow managed to remove herself in a safe way from horrible things that happened to her and still get herself through life and be able to eventually write a book. And it's a memoir, it's a true story. So that one's, and it's a really interesting to read. And it's a really popular, it's a hit book right now, whatever. So I highly recommend it. The other one, Where the Crawdads Sing, is also a book about somebody who had trauma. It's a novel, but it speaks to the trauma that we can't ever fix. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that too, as well, because no matter what we do, there are traumas that happen to kids during school that even if we're the best teacher and we set rules and we set behaviors and something still happens and you do everything right after the fact, you can't fix the trauma of what happened to the kid. Does that make sense?
I just saw my adorable number 2 child in Florida. At the age of 37, he said the following words, not out of context. He had a stuffed animal that we gave him it was an odd looking thing, and he called him Buck. And he took this toy to the day school, and his teacher took it away from him. And to this day, he's saying it was never returned.
And he never forgot it.
And he never forgot it, and he feels like he's been cheated in life.
So that's where a trauma that could impact somebody, we have no idea. That seems like to us nothing that would be traumatic, but it is. Like there are things that we all remember about teachers or things that really did had an impact on us that still hold true today. We haven't let go of it. We haven't forgotten it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important to keep in mind. The challenge for us as teachers is really, to be honest, I'll be honest, the challenge is to be able to do those 3 things and to create a culture of love, to be able to set boundaries, and to be able to help a child see the good in themselves, all in the 1 year that you have them. And if you're a religious school teacher, all in the 25 days you have in the entire year.
For 45 minutes.
Right. So, for 25, exactly. So I am going to talk a little bit about the strategies and some of the things that they suggest. And there is a video that we're going to watch at the end as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about mistakes that we make. I do want to say something. So the ACEs quiz, my oldest, I have 4 kids. My 2 oldest are really my stepkids. I've been with them since they were 3 and 5. Okay, so my oldest is a music teacher. She has a family. She lives a very productive, healthy-looking life. But she took the quiz and said, I had 4. And I'm pretty much sure I know which 4. No, I pretty much know which 4 they were. But I think the difference for her is she had two families, and one was really stable and consistent for her. And so I think not that she had the trauma, but she was somehow, and it's not perfect. She struggles emotionally. And we'll talk about some things that we can be doing that nobody did for her because nobody would have known. When she was a kid growing up, she was your really good student, your A student, the quiet one, the perfect one, the shy one. She's also introverted. So nobody would have ever imagined the things that may have been going on in her head. And also, then she becomes a teenager, and who can imagine what's going on in their head anyway? Like I'm still at the point of going, I cannot wait till you're 2 years as a teenager and you see what that was like. But on the other hand, I have to remind myself, holy cow, lots of crap happened to her when she was growing up. So, and it had her brother, who probably experienced many of the same things, probably interprets them differently, and he might not have 4. So, because everyone 2 years younger, different impact, different personality. So, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about strategies that you can use. Let me get I have them here. There you go. So the first one is to look beyond the behavior, which to me is the first thing we have to do. Every time something happens, we have to look beyond the behavior. I had a friend posted on Facebook. She's a bus driver, a school bus driver. And some kid, I don't remember what he did, but he said something really not nice to her. And she posted on there and asked us what advice, what to do. And my response to her was, let it go.
Nothing.
Let it go. And in fact, just smile and be nice to him the next time you see him and drop it. Because you have no idea what happened to him that day, and it's not about you. And that is one of the key things we have to say to ourselves, is we have to look beyond the behavior. It makes kids angry. It makes them depressed, uncooperative, distracted, all the things where we jump to a conclusion and we have no idea what trauma or baggage a kid is carrying. The same is true.
Beyond the behavior, or should we try and find out what happened? And maybe not a bus driver, but a teacher?
No, a lot of times I think for a lot of times we react to behavior, and the behavior itself is not what the kid needs, is just love.
That's what I'm saying, but like just to try and talk to the kid and how did your morning go?
So I think not necessarily.
Sometimes something happens to a child or somebody says something mean to them or they're frustrated, and the next thing they do is they get on the bus. So they have to dump someplace. They can't always dump in the in the place where they got it from.
And so it doesn't necessarily, and I also think about this all the time, because, kids who have ADHD or kids who have trauma but were misdiagnosed, because that's what we think they have, they spend all day holding it together in school. When school is over and something may have happened that we don't know happened, whatever, in the bus, at home, they let down. So sometimes analyzing and discussing isn't really what a kid needs at all. They just need someone because sometimes if you ignore behaviors and just respond to them with love, those behaviors start to change. It's also very slow. It's not something, and that's the real challenge in working with kids, is that, when you're their all-day teacher, you have so many opportunities to interact and create a relationship. When you're their Hebrew school teacher, you have really limited ones, but you still have them. In fact, sometimes you're the only reason they might like Hebrew school. And I'll talk about a bad choice I made, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
Can I ask a question about
Yes.
behavior? I often, if I see something, I'll pick up the phone and call the parent. Should I not be?
It depends on why you're calling the parent and what could be happening at home.
Yeah.
So sometimes you weigh that. You don't know what's going on at home. And so it depends on your relationship with the parents. If I were to call a parent for that, I would call them to ask them is there something going on that I don't know about, and would say to them, please, I'm not looking for you to consequence them. I just want to know, what else can I do to help? But the danger, and this happens a lot, is that you just don't know what happens when you make that call home. So when you know and you've partnered with parents well, and you know them well, then maybe you do, and you feel comfortable with it. I think this is, and particularly in cases of abuse and things where we don't know, I think that's a really scary part. So I think it just depends on you and your relationship with them, and how you're communicating to the kid what you're doing. Like calling your parents in a punitive way and saying, call your parents is one thing. Saying, you know what, I'm really worried about you. I am going to call your parents only because I want to know what's going on. I also believe, and this is even little kids, that I would tell them ahead of time and say, and I don't want you to think you're in trouble. That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I just want to know more and see if there's anything I can do to help you, because I really care about you, because you're a really good kid. Kids don't hear that enough. We don't realize how little they hear that. And don't forget, it's challenging because sometimes the kids who do that, we don't like them. The truth is, they rub us the wrong way, and it's really hard to build that relationship. So building relationships and creating a safe environment. So building relationships is, Love and Logic gives you tons of great skills. He's talked about some of them, the things you can do that actually are known to help build relationships. It's that greeting at the door. It's the way you talk to them. It's the eye contact. It's any way you might do that. It's that teacher who kept writing the kid during the summer. That's how you build relationships with kids.
I'm thinking about, I think I know who you were talking about with the strict teacher, and I bet you know who you were talking about. One of the amazing things she did when my kids had her is a couple times during the year, she'd call them. She would call
It
them
probably
on the
is that
phone
one.
to call the kid
I'm
and
sure it's
say, I just called to tell you that I was so impressed with what you said today when you, and then repeat back a comment.
right next to my office.
You know, or I just wanted to, you
I'm
know,
going to talk about it.
I just wanted you to know that I was thinking about you. I loved what you wrote in your essay, or whatever. Like a couple times during the year, she would call. She would not talk to the parents. She'd say, "Is Yogi there? Is Shoshi there?" And
Right.
just call them to tell them something good.
That's a great example.
I've just never seen anything quite
So
like
that never
where
happens in public school, I would assume.
I-
And that's got to be a really big deal when it
I don't know that
happens.
that happens in any school. Not every teacher does that.
No,
This one
was
did.
extraordinary. Yeah.
She was. And
And I
I'll
know for a
talk
fact
about
she
it.
did it for all the kids,
Right.
not just my kids. Like she
Right.
did that with all the kids.
She did. Creating a safe environment. This is the one where we talk about, it really has a lot to do with the boundaries you set in your classroom and what kids know will happen. It's for a classroom to be a safe environment, there's got to be consistency. There's got to be some predictability on what will happen. And knowing that you have a kid's back, meaning that when you see or find something happens, that you stop it. And again, you cannot fix it. So the reason I mention this is in the book where the Crawdads sing, this little girl was really living alone in the swamps in somewhere south. And somehow the school got wind of her and they came and got her to take her to school, just one day to take her to school. I don't know if anybody, here's another, anybody watch Anne with an E?
Yes.
It's a series, similar kind of a thing. So this girl goes to school and before, like the teachers don't even know what happened to her, kids are mean. She never went back, would never ever go back. She's bright and learned a ton. She was very smart, wrote poetry, did a whole bunch of really cool things, but she would never, that was it. It didn't matter that the teacher corrected what happened afterwards. Now most kids don't have that option, but imagine you're that kid who dreads coming to school every day. And even though you're the relationship and you've tried to create a safe environment, there's nothing you can do really to guarantee it, unless, I don't want to say there's nothing to do. I think there are teachers who create a community in their classroom that sets the example. So I'm going to give you an example of something I did that I'm really proud of. This was a summer camp story. We are coming back from the Dells and we're in a bus, and one of the kids has to go to the bathroom. There's 100 kids on the bus with us, whatever, we're going back, really has to go to the bathroom. And I say to the bus driver, you need to pull over. You need to pull out the exit right now and just pull over on the side of the road. She does. She says to me, I'm going to get in trouble. The police will stop me. I go, I will take care of it. So he runs out to go to the bathroom. But this is like, everyone sees this, right? He's running out to the grass to go, pee. He didn't make it, okay? The girl who happened to be sitting next to him, and I remember who she is still, took her beach towel and wiped it up and didn't say a word. And what I'm proud of myself for is I turned to the bus and I made an announcement and I said, no one, and I said it like this, no one will ever say a word about this. This could have been you. Any one of you, this could have been you. It will never be brought up again and no one will say anything to them. They were silent. Part of it is because I had a relationship with most of the kids already, but I was really proud of it, and I don't think anybody ever did, and we moved on from that. And it was a kid who had issues. Probably didn't go to the bathroom when we told him to go to the bathroom. Probably, like all those kinds of things. So that's that is one of my proud moments, when I feel good, like I did it right, I created a safe environment for him. I'll tell you my bad moments in a minute. Meeting students where they are. That means you make accommodations for different kids. So it would be, in your case, letting your kid keep his stuffed animal. And who cares? Like, what is it hidden in the desk, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That might be it. My daughter went to first grade and took her blankie with her, all under her desk. Like, she had lots of anxiety, lots of issues, especially in first grade. And I was the middle school counselor at the day school at the time. And I literally, if I had a meeting in the classroom across from her, sometimes I had to walk out crying because I could hear what was going on. Took her shopping and bought her a smaller blankie for school that could fit in her desk. So it wasn't as obvious. But her teacher made those accommodations. Her teachers, meeting her where she's at, allowed her to, without me even knowing that she did this, she kept a snack inside her desk that she would pop into her mouth. Now think about that. Teachers don't let people do that sometimes. So they did that, and I didn't hear about till third grade. The teacher said, "Do you know that she keeps, like a bag of Cheerios or something in there, and she'll open her desk drawer and take a little bit out?" And I was like,
So what?
"No, but thank you for telling me." But she wasn't complaining. The teacher was just informing me. It was not an issue. So that's an example of meeting a kid where they are, where it's not really that important, and not every kid needs to be met the same way. Kids understand that better than we think they do. Just like parents will say, I don't treat my children the same. As a teacher, you know your kids. And sometimes when you say to kids, it's a higher expectation too, because you expect different from different kids. You just do. And so that also is part of that, but doing it in a way where it doesn't look unfair, where it's not obvious. Part of this is how you show that publicly versus privately with kids.
I like that today, in this day and age, there's a big deal about everybody being different. And I remember being handed some toys for children who have,
Right, to touch and hold. And
so David Cohn came into the class on Sunday, and he was going to talk to the kids for half an hour. And I saw one of the kids just like, I think he was going to take off any second. I was so scared. And I grabbed one of those things. I remembered I had it in my drawer. And I just walked around, and as I walked, I just kind of dropped it on his, and the rest is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Amazing. That's a perfect example. Thank you. That's a great one. What was I going to say? With the daughter who kept eating, when she got to fifth grade, actually I requested this particular teacher because I have always, not ever requested, well, this one I requested more, but more about trying to find the best fit for her and what made the most sense. And by fifth grade, I thought she was ready for someone a little scarier and a little tougher. I really thought she was ready. So, and what I didn't realize is that I don't think at the time I realized, because this is a teacher who would sound like, you'd hear her yelling and you'd think like she's mean, but you'd look at the kids and none of them would ever flip out, because they truly felt she loved them. So when I told her about my daughter, might have snacks in there, and I didn't think she would be okay with that, she said, "Oh my goodness, I announced to kids, you cannot learn if you're hungry." So in those days, I have crackers and peanut butter, which would never happen anymore, in the closet. And I say to kids, it's there for you if you need it. Nice. Okay, talk about meeting students where they are. Like, that was just great. So that's one. Being predictable. Next one, I'll give you an example that they give. There was a student who was really anxious, and it was about letting that teacher actually let the kid call home once a day, just because there were things that she was fearful of, and that just helped her deal with it and got her through the day. So same kind of thing. The other part of it is even creating safe spaces in your classroom, or places where kids can go to take their break that they might need. There's schools, I don't know if many schools have this right now, but I know some schools have like a sensory room that they can go to, and it's a quiet room, and you can go there and you can take the time you need to be okay. So that's another example. Be predictable. that is probably the hardest thing for kids is because when you've got trauma, a lot of that was unpredictable. If you think about anger at home and things that could have happened to kids, it's very unpredictable. So as a teacher, you really want to be predictable, have consistency, and have structure. You don't have to be mean, you just need to have a system that kids know what to expect. They know how you're going to react. They know what you do. So that's, okay, that's that one. Let's go to the next. The next is there's social emotional training. There's a lot of that right now. And that is referring to things like mindfulness, which there is so much research on mindfulness right now and about the impact it has on kids being able to calm themselves and on their future. So if you can hook up with somebody who does mindfulness, if you know much about mindfulness training, I highly encourage that. I'm looking for my little outline on that. And there's also like trauma-informed therapy. There's art, there's centering things into art, yoga, all of those kinds of things. Social skills training programs. A lot of kids, particularly kids that have experienced trauma, they don't know how to socialize. They really don't, they're just not appropriate. But nobody's taught them. And the truth is, social skills training is good for everybody. So that was one of the things I did a lot of, and so did my colleague was the school nurse, and she did a lot of that as well. And so there was a program that we did a lot of research and selected, and it was an anti-bullying program. But the cool thing is, part of the anti-bullying program was just a social skills training. The first part for kindergartners was about being able to read emotions, being able to look at a picture and understand what somebody might be feeling. That's huge for kids. That's social skills training. This was about how, different kinds of situations that you could run into and how do you handle them. And they would role play different situations and talk about them, define them. So that was part of the bullying program, it's all part of it. It's not just about how to say no to a bully and how to walk away and how to get help. It was more really about building social skills all the way through 8th grade. This one I find really fascinating, but another thing is, I don't know if anybody knows much about restorative justice, over zero tolerance. So a lot of schools went to a zero tolerance bullying policy, which isn't really the right answer for that. Not that you tolerate it, but zero tolerance doesn't allow for really figuring out what the problem is. It happens and you're out. And there's a consequence and nobody's really looking at it. Restorative justice is the other end of that, which is, this really depends, but that's working with victims and the perpetrators to come up with a solution that works for everybody. This is true literally in the justice system today. That's a program, Milwaukee was running a restorative justice program. I don't know if they still are.
David Lerman started it in this community.
He did.
And it's still going on.
But it's more the idea of looking at zero tolerance as being on this end, restorative justice as being a positive, maybe not necessarily extreme, but it's complicated because you got to have training, you got to know what you're doing. And then the other piece of it is looking at how do you help kids deal with the fact that we can't prevent ball bullying. We can do the best we can, but giving kids a say in their own fate and how things should be handled and what they can deal with. And the last one is to take care of yourself, because the reality is you are only as good as you are feeling. So if you're sick, if you haven't given yourself enough space, if you haven't gotten the help you need to deal with some of those tough kids, you just won't be as effective. And there's nothing, you just have to take care of yourself. That's the old image of in the airplane when they tell you, first put on the mask for you and then put it on the child, because if you have air, you're going to be able to help somebody. But if you don't have air, you're not going to be able to be effective at helping somebody else. So that's so those are the key strategies I kind of wanted to give you today. I want to go somewhere else with this a little bit. And I talked about this one teacher who was amazing, and I forgot about that she did that, which is another really cool thing. And I shared my proud moment when I was happy about it. But I do want to share my biggest mistake that I still clearly remember. And there is no way for me to fix this with this kid anymore, but I have never forgotten it. So, I was a teacher at Emmanuel. I was a kid at Emmanuel. So I had a really good relationship. I taught the same group of kids for 2 years. I had a really good relationship with them. And we had a child who was particularly challenging and wasn't always there. But he was particularly challenging, and I handled him pretty well most of the time. And I also had a policy of, if you aren't in control of yourself, it's okay to get some time out and leave the classroom and come back when you're ready. Now, in Love and Logic, and not Love and Logic, in another video that I'm going to show you a clip of, I was watching, he was saying that it's also a mistake to let them decide. I think it depends on the age of the kid, when they're ready and when they can come back in.
Yeah.
Because when you're that out of control, sometimes you're not able to make a decision of when you're ready. So, but in this case, I was working with middle schoolers who most of the time, if I just said to them, you're not in trouble, go out. Or I would even call down, because, in these days, you can't just put a kid in the hallway. Like, it's not safe, it's whatever. So I would say, I want you to go to the office, and I would call the office and say, they're not in trouble, I just want them to sit. They're just fine. Well, so that was my typical normal thing. So he did something, I don't remember what it was, but it was bad enough, and I was fast enough on it that I said, you need to leave, you need to take some time now. But he wasn't really calm enough to do that. And he really couldn't have done it by himself. So I made the mistake of doing that and saying, just go down to the office. And also, even if I wasn't mad and consequencing him, he heard it that way. So even if I wanted him down in the office, and the other problem is that, that there were other people that would see and know him. So he was so angry that when he walked out, he punched a hole in the wall in the building. And he got expelled. That was the end. If I could do anything over, I would do that over. Because this is a kid who I know had trauma, who I know had stuff going on with them. And we all make mistakes. I can only be so hard on myself as I can. But to know that those mistakes we make, they have huge impacts on kids.
Trudy, what would you have done differently if you were redoing it right now?
I think I probably would have had a calmer voice, is my guess. I probably would have pulled him to the side. I probably might have said, let's sit over here. I might have just left the classroom and gotten somebody to come up with them and let me go out with him. I just, all different things. And I'm not 100% sure what I would have done.
And I remember that situation, and I just have to tell you, you shouldn't feel guilty because that child
He
has
still has issues.
so many issues.
He does, and I know that, but
no matter what you did, it may
Right.
not have turned out well. So,
that is absolutely true, and I know that. But for me, and and I think it's not a bad thing to have examples in your life of mistakes that you make that you wish you had done differently. Right, absolutely. So actually, that is what I want you to do now. I just want you to take a piece of paper for a minute, and I want you to write down a time when you know that you handled something incorrectly. Any example of any story, just for yourself. You do not need to share. I just want you to think about an example of when you feel you handled something incorrectly, when you used a technique that didn't work, or was even a technique that you knew you shouldn't have used. Does that make sense? So what happened in the situation? What would you have done differently? And were you ever able to correct what you did? So I just want you to think for a few minutes and see if you can come up with something that sticks in your mind. And on the other end of that, if you were able to think of something, I want you to think about a time when you felt like really successful as a teacher. You did, and not about a class lesson, but about a kid that you know that you made an impact with. About a kid that you felt like you really succeeded well with them. What happened? What made it successful? What did you do in that situation that just worked right? Oh, there it is. When we really successful. Good. And here's the other one. What's your do-over? What happened and what would you do differently? As you're thinking about those things, does anybody have anything they want to share? Anything that came up for them? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my do-over, all last summer I was a summer camp counselor here.
Yeah, I could, hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, thank you. Good idea.
Be in trouble, but we're
Good
just,
point. Thank
it's
you.
a good time to pause it.
And as being who she was. But there was a woman that I grew up with, her name is Mrs. Gottesman, down in the south suburbs of Chicago, and our families were very close and whatever. But anyway, she exuded love to everybody. You just felt love no matter who you were. And my mom is amazing. My mom is a really loving, wonderful person, but nobody could do it like she did. And she was also a teacher who kids loved. She had 4 kids. She had rules. She had structures. She had everything. But somehow, like, my goal in life would have been able to treat people and make them feel the way she would make everybody feel. I don't have it in me naturally. I don't. So the challenge is for me to really go out of my comfort zone and try as much as I can to do that, and not to have people think I'm being judgmental or critical, because that's how I just come off. So I think about her and think about, what does it mean to show someone that you love them and think they're wonderful no matter what they do, no matter how they behave, that you still don't tolerate certain things, but that you still love them. It is not an easy skill to develop, but I think it's skill. For some people, it clearly comes more naturally. But I also believe that our unnatural, the tendencies that aren't natural for us, we can still do. And to give you a perfect example, that I don't know if anybody's ever taken a Myers-Briggs personality inventory. It's really cool. I I actually think it's a really great way to look at people. But anyway, if you look at my scores in that realm, I should be like an administrator who fires people, because I don't have a heart. Like, that is, so I just want you to know. So when you look at your scores, your natural tendencies on a survey like this, which is research done, it's if it's used properly, it's used right, it's really good. But it's not meant to be limiting. It talks about what your natural tendencies are. And there's a continuum of where you are on each of those tendencies, and you can move along them. You can work on them and do it. But I was a middle school counselor, which so I would sit there and listen to 6th grade girls, and you want to just smack them and say, get a life and drop that friend. And they're so mean to you. Why do you care? And who cares about what they said? And all those things. And I would have to be like, that's so hard, and try, and I worked really hard at my skills. So I worked really hard at exuding love. And it doesn't come naturally, but if you know that about yourself and you work hard, you can still do it. You'll just never be Mrs. Gottesman, but you can still be good at what you do. And my other pride is with the class that at Emmanuel, and many of the classes that I've had over the years, is I'm still in touch with kids, and kids will still remember that they had me. And another example I'll give you, in the one for Emmanuel, it was, day of email. I would send out a weekly newsletter to parents and just let them know what we were doing, and show kids videos, things that made them like being Jewish, that made it interesting and fun. And so, those are things I'm proud of. So, I just want everybody to look at yourself and say, this is maybe who I am, but it's not only who I am, and it's not the only way I can be. So, and that said, if you're one of those loving persons but can't be consistent and stable and predictable for kids, you got to figure out how to do that part of it too, because that's just as important. And kids, particularly kids with trauma and anxiety, really need that. They need that predictability. So that said, the last thing I want to do is, I really believe in this, and I'm going to show you. So the Charles Day was from Love and Logic Institute. I did a session years ago. You may have been here on Love and Logic. It's all about strategies and working with children, and they're great. They do great skills. This guy I've also met. Actually, I've met him twice. We brought him into camp, to Beaver Camp, to train our staff. Years later, this video is really old, but he's really good. Like, I almost want to cry sometimes when I listen to what he says. So we're going to start it at a point. If you ever get a chance to go Google him, Poker Chip for Giveaway, and watch the whole hour-long video, I highly encourage you that you do it. It's worth it. He says stuff that just gets to your heart, I think, about, and gets kids. His focus has been on learning disabled kids. Everything he says that he's talking about, when you hear learning disabled, I want you to think trauma and anxiety. It's the same, kids feel the same way as what he describes. So, let me find my point at which I want to start this. I think it's going to start at the beginning. Oops, sorry, I have to let the ad go, I think, first. And then I think it's going to make us
know that these children
it's in the right
respond to
place.
the
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. I did not do this. Okay. We just start at 4903. That's where I am. Okay. So, anyway, and he says, by the way, he never knew when he did this little piece on when he talks about poker chips. He said he never knew that that would take off, that would be a big thing, that people would think that was so much. But it's been a huge, it has had a huge impact in how we work at our summer camp. And we teach our kids, our staff love and logic, and we teach our staff about poker chips. We do the poker chip training that you're going to see in 20 minutes. We do it in 3 minutes, but we get the message across. So there you go.
Go to neutral turf. Go to the gym. Let's take a walk around campus. Let's go to the dining hall. That's not mine. That's not his. That's neutral turf. And when you do what I do for a living, you have this unfortunate duty. I got a phone call not too long ago. Rick, Lindsay's grandfather died. Would you? Because she needs to be with her stuff. She needs to be around her stuff. She needs to be in her room to get that news. When you talk to a kid, you conference with a kid, you not only have to think about when you're doing it, how you're doing it, even where you're doing it. The bottom line is that preventive discipline works. We know that these children respond to the environment in which they find themselves. So the key to dealing with their behavior, the key to effectively dealing with the behavior is to put them in an environment that is responsive to them and that allows them to behave. What it all comes down to, what the entire purpose of this series is basically our ability to work better and work more effectively with kids. And whenever anybody comes to a workshop like this, it's somewhere in the beginning, middle, or end of the workshop, the speaker says, you've got to work on the child's self-esteem. How do you do that? How do you build the child's self-esteem? Well, I've come up with an analogy that I think works. In order to build a child's self-esteem and work on a child's self-esteem, I would ask you to think of self-esteem as being poker chips. Self-esteem is basically poker chips. If you've got a good self-esteem, a strong self-esteem, you've got a lot of poker chips. And if you've got a poor self-esteem, a low self-esteem, you don't have many poker chips. Simple as that. Let's talk about two children who go to the school that your child goes to. These two children go to every school in the country. One child is named Joe Cool. Joe Cool has tons and tons and tons of poker chips. How did he get all those poker chips? By good things happening to him. When good things happen to you, you get poker chips. Captain of the football team, here's 10,000 poker chips. Voted king of the homecoming dance, here's 15,000 poker chips. Get your picture in the paper for scoring a winning touchdown, here's 12,000 poker chips. This kid's got millions and millions of poker chips. He's had a charmed life, God bless him. He feels great about himself, and he should. Now, you also lose poker chips when bad things happen to you. You go to the prom with, Joe Cool goes to the prom with the best looking girl on campus. 20,000 poker chips. Prom night comes, he's got a pimple on the end of his nose. He loses 3,000 poker chips, but he still has a net gain of 17,000 poker chips. He's still 17,000 poker chips ahead. And this kid goes to school every day with his baskets and bags full of poker chips. And sitting next to him is Larry, the learning disabled kid. Larry, the learning disabled kid, has poker chips like this. This is it. This is all he's ever got. Never been voted captain of anything. Didn't go to the prom. Never been on a team. Never got 100 in a test. Didn't blow the top off his SATs. Didn't even take his SATs. He's got a stack of poker chips like this. And now with the inclusion movement, we make those two kids go to school together and compete against each other in the games of school. I would submit to you that that's not fair. I would submit that that's not fair. Anybody play poker here? Are any poker players here? Sir, Chris, could you join me up here with mine? Suppose, Chris, I would ask you if you wanted to play poker. And I say, Chris, here's basically the deal. You're going to have this many poker chips, okay? I'm going to have all the poker chips in the Western world. I've got basically 10 million poker chips back there. I'm going to play poker against you. What would be your first response? Would you want to play? Okay, his first response would be, I don't want to play. What do we think the learning disabled kid is saying to us when he says, I don't want to go to school today, Ma? Don't make me go. I got one of those stomach aches again, Ma. Don't make me go. Please don't make me go to school today. What's he saying to you? He's saying, I don't have enough chips to get in the game. I don't have enough chips. Don't make me play this game. But we say to him, you got to play it. The law says you've got to play, you've got to go to school. So I say to you, Chris, you've got to play poker with me. You're going to have that many chips, and I have bundles and bundles of chips back there. How would you play, Chris? Would you play conservatively, or would you play recklessly?
Probably reckless.
Probably recklessly. He would be one of those who would say, I'll bet the whole thing, I don't care. That's what the learning disabled kid, that's what the learning disabled kid says when he says, sure, I can walk along the edge of that building. Sure, I can try dope. Sure, I can join the group again. Sure, I can do that. In other words, I'm just going to be spontaneous and do anything. I'm just going to bet the whole thing. I don't care. I'll just bet the whole thing. Would any of you play conservatively? Yeah, some people are saying I play conservatively. I just bet one chip at a time. That's what the kid with a learning disability is saying to you when he says, no, I don't want to ask anybody to the dance. Don't ask me to mine. I don't want to put anything in the science fair. I don't want to go to summer school. I'm going to take the chips that I've got and I'm going to hold on tight to those and I'm not going to let these go. And in school, we make these two kids play the game of school against each other, and I would submit to you that that's not fair. So in class, the first day, we're in class one day, and the teacher says, who was the president of the United States during the Civil War? And Joe Cool's sitting there and saying, I think it was Calvin Coolidge, but I'm not sure. Well, what the heck, I've got 10 million poker chips. If I get this answer wrong, it's only going to cost me 5. Was it Calvin Coolidge? Teacher says, no. Larry, the learning disabled kid, is sitting there and he's looking at this little stack of poker chips. He's got 25 poker chips to his name. And he's thinking, I think the answer is Abraham Lincoln. I think the answer is Abraham Lincoln, but I just don't dare answer. I don't dare respond because I have another game I've got to play at lunch. You see, yesterday when I went to lunch, I gave the lunch lady, the one with the hairnet, the tattoo, I gave the lunch lady a $20 bill and she only gave me change for a 10. And my father said, don't you come back without that extra $10. You go to that lady and you tell her she gave me the wrong change. And he's thinking, that's going to take me 25 chips. It's going to take 25 chips for me to go and ask that lady for my money back. So I don't dare play in this game because if I lose the chips, I won't have enough to play in the game I've got to play at lunch. And the teacher says, the right answer is Abraham Lincoln. Larry goes, oh, I should have done it. I should have done it. The reality is that the self-esteem of our kids, the problem with the self-esteem of our kids is they just don't have enough poker chips. The solution is to give them poker chips. How do you give kids poker chips? How do you build their self-esteem? One is you find, if you're a parent or you're a teacher, you find the island, what Bob Brooks calls the island of competence. You find the one thing that child can do well and you make a big deal out of that. You celebrate that. You make that very important. If you're a mom and the only thing your child knows how to do is use a Phillips head screwdriver, every Thursday before he gets off the bus, you loosen every bloody screw in the house. And when he gets off the bus, you give him the screwdriver and say, go to it, pal, because nobody does it like you. You got to be a talent scout. You got to find things he does well. You got to find, because every time you praise a child, every time you say, that was a good job, you're giving him poker chips. Parenting is pretty simple. Being a teacher is pretty simple. It all comes down to this. Your job is to make sure that every child you deal with has more poker chips when he goes to bed that night than he or she had when they got up in the morning. That's it. It's that simple. And how do you make sure they have poker chips? You give as many poker chips as possible. Secondly, you take away only as many poker chips as necessary. Please listen to me, dads, because we dads are real good at this. Let's say that Chris is my son. And Chris is sitting in class, sitting at the dinner table, want to cup your hands like that for me, Chris? Chris is sitting at the dinner table and he's got that many poker chips. He's got that many chips. And we're sitting at the dinner table and Chris spills his milk. And I say, you know, Chris, sometimes you make me sick. You know, you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and say, how can I spoil Dad's day? Is that what your problem is? You're the only one in the family who does this. Sometimes I even wonder why we have you in this family. Go to your room. And he goes up to his room. And the rest of the family sitting there, oh boy. And I sit there and I think, oh boy, that was pretty rough. That was pretty rough on old Chris. That's pretty tough on Chris. I wasn't really mad at Chris. I was mad at my secretary. So I should go apologize to him. So I go up and I sit on the edge of Chris's bed and I stroke his hair and I say, gee, Chris, I'm sorry, pal. I shouldn't have yelled at you that way. I shouldn't have yelled at you that way. That was wrong. That won't happen again. Sorry, Dad. Sorry, Dad. Yelling at him in front of the family, telling him you wish he wasn't in the family, asking him if he plans how to spoil your day, telling him you're basically sick of seeing him when you come home from work. You took away 50, 60,000 poker chips from him. Sit in the edge of his bed, stroke his hair, tell him you love him. 5,000 poker chips is the most. You're still 55,000 poker chips behind the 8 ball. You can't do that with our kids. You can't take away those massive number of poker chips without realizing that you're making your job as a parent much tougher. And lastly, you got to give as many as you can. Take away only what's necessary. And lastly, you've got to be willing to go to the mat with people who take poker chips away from the child and not give any back. Teachers take away chips. Bus drivers take away chips. Principals take away chips. But most of us also give chips back. And if you take poker chips away from a kid, but then give some back, that's okay. There's a lot of people in your child's life who play that role. But the bottom line is, if there's someone in your child's life who is taking poker chips away and not giving any back, they're making your life much tougher. When are we going to deal with this? That's what advocacy means. Standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. If you're a teacher or a parent, you've got to be willing to go to the mat with people who take chips away from your kid and not give any back. You're a mom, you get up in the morning, you make him French toast. Oh man, 20,000 chips. You lay out his favorite clothes, a Beavis and Butthead t-shirt that he loves and you hate, 15,000 chips. You put his books at the door, ready for him to go out the door, 10,000 chips. You warm up the maple syrup, oh my God. You warm up the maple syrup, another.
Okay.
Hey, don't torture her. You can't.
Sorry, I don't know why it goes to this thing at the end, but that's, so isn't that a great analogy?
Incredible.
Like, and it, so, when I'm at camp, we talk to the staff about the fact that our kids come, we have no idea in schools or anywhere you are, how many poker chips a kid comes with. And so, when you have a lot of poker chips and you come with a lot, and I think about this with summer camps because there are many kids who have a great year. They come and they have lots of poker chips. There are kids who, they only get their poker chips at camp in the summer. And those poker chips they get at camp last them the entire year to get through till they're back at camp again. So what summer camps do, but the same is true with schools and with teachers, is that if we can give more poker chips and they go home with more at the end of each day than they came in the day, we're doing so much more for them. Instead of, and the other thing we have to look at is what do we do that takes away poker chips from kids? And how does that impact kids who have trauma and anxiety, or just any kids? How do we do that in a way that's real to think about? Like, how do we give them poker chips that are real, that aren't like, just fake finding things that they're good at? You really have to know. So I will tell you another trick is to, another way to give poker chips is just to notice children. Like just to notice them. And by noticing, I mean saying things like, notice you're wearing a colorful scarf today. That's all I said. Not I like it, not that's my favorite color, not anything. I just said, I noticed you. And sometimes they'll look at you and they'll say, oh, do you like that? And you'll go, yeah, it's really nice, but I just want you to know I noticed it. You picked that up today, maybe it had meaning for you. Or maybe you say, you picked that out today, is that one of your favorites? They ask you, do you like it? And you go, well, do you like it? You picked it, tell me about it. Noticing kids is a great way to give them poker chips. And that is a great way to build relationships with kids. And again, it has to be like things that you notice. It's things like, have you seen those videos of the teacher who has three different things when kids come in at the beginning of the day? It's on the wall. They can choose what they want from the teacher. The teacher stands at the door and they can choose a fist bump, a hug, or a high five or something like that. And so they come in. But every day, that message the teacher is giving them is, I'm looking at you today for 1 second as you walk in the door. So those are the kinds of messages I think we can do, the strategies that we can do that can have a huge impact on kids.
This reminded me of something. My oldest son was living in DC and he was going to this amazing, it's called the DC Synagogue. And it's like the rabbi, and I can't think of his name, he's amazing. At the end of every service, he stands at the door and these men line up to get the hug from him. Have you ever seen anything like it? The line is so long because everybody wants to take their time. And it's like, it's an affirmation that I care about you. I don't know what it is, but I've never seen it in any synagogue. And the truth is that adults need it just as much as children.
And this whole thing about trauma and anxiety was about what are the impact that has on them as adults. And so the number one thing that in everything I read, the things that can mitigate all of these things is just a relationship with one person. And in everything I read, one of those potential persons is a teacher. And so I think that is really sends a message that we really do have the opportunity to make a difference. We also have an opportunity to do damage and to try to fix as best as we can, but to know that, we're not perfect. So we're gonna, just like as parents, we're not perfect and we're gonna do something wrong. But to know that what we do makes the difference. And it really does matter and kind of, yeah.
So over the years, there have been times where I've observed, where whatever position I was in, I've observed other teachers or education directors or parents take away a student's poker chips. Is it okay for me or the observer to go in and try to dole out some more? Like how do you, if you've observed this
It happening?
Yeah, if you've observed it happening,
Right.
is it okay to go in and say?
Well, I think as always as teachers, we're always gonna be careful of, are we overstepping our bounds with somebody else? So it may be that at that moment, right then you don't in front, it may be that there's a conversation that happens. It may be that you find that child privately and say, I want you to know I saw that, and I want you to know I noticed, and I'm gonna do something about it, and I really care about you. That gives them that's poker chips right there. It's just saying, I noticed, I care, it's not done with. You may not hear anything about it, but I just want you to know I'm not blind to it. It could be something like that, and it could be talking to teachers about it, or talk to a principal about it, or whatever. I think we always have to be careful because we just don't know the whole story, the whole picture of what can happen. But it's the same like if you see a parent, you also don't know can they step in right there? Are they gonna hit you? Or what could happen? So it's a really fine, it's not a good answer because there's not a definite answer. It's a fine line. You have to be careful with yourself too to make sure that you're safe. But it's complicated.
The other thing about these poker chips in a Jewish setting is I don't think we should underestimate the impact that these poker chips have on their Jewish identity. I will tell you, on their Jewish identity. I will tell you the most poker chips I got when I was growing up were at synagogue, whether it was at Sunday school or Friday night services. I remember every Friday night at the end of services, I used to help the custodian collect all the Siddurim. I don't know why. And I'm still passing out Siddurim at my shul today. It just must be a thing. But I would help him collect them all. And he would he'd praise on me, thank me a whole lot. And it gave me a lot of poker chips. I was a little kid, But those were my biggest poker chips. And I don't think it's coincidental that I had such a love of.
So it's interesting you say that because I think for me, very much the same. And it always pains me when I still hear peers who were in the same class with me who don't have that same feeling or of an experience that was positive, where I don't understand.
But
So
the
if
opposite
some
is
of it
probably
may be
true as
who
well,
we are.
right? If they're having a negative experience in Sunday
Sure.
school or whatever, that may make them feel negatively
Right, that's
about
what I'm
Judaism
saying,
as a
right.
whole. Right.
It may
So
be, but
it puts
we
more
could be in the
importance on what we're
same-
doing.
Right, well, we could be in the same setting and what you experience could be one thing and what somebody else experiences could be completely different. Which, and some of that also has to do with how many poker chips you already have, to be quite honest. So another example I'll give you is that when I was like a freshman or a sophomore, I don't know what year I was, but I had a favorite teacher. I've been with him for 3 years, I think, and I was not paying any attention in class. And it was an English teacher, and he was teaching about phallic symbols, and I wasn't listening. And then out of the blue, I like heard it and realized I wasn't listening. I raised my hand and I said, "I'm sorry, again, what's a phallic symbol?" And he knew I wasn't. And he just looked at me and he goes, "Trudy, it's a penis." Bright red, terribly embarrassed, was humiliated, walked out. But interestingly enough, I don't have negative feelings about him and about that because I had enough poker chips that didn't do enough damage at all. And so I was embarrassed in front of everybody, and maybe you could say you don't really deserve that kind of embarrassment. On the other hand, he knew me well enough to know whatever. But if I was a different kid and I didn't have those poker chips, I could hate English forever. I could hate that teacher forever. All those things could be different. So some of that is also the resilience that we have in ourselves and the poker chips that we have for ourselves. Was this helpful? Yes, go ahead.
Kind of bouncing off of Jen's question.
Do you want this the video off or on?
Sure. Yeah, we can. Indictments. Sure, and spiel.
Do you want that now off?
No, I have a question.
Okay, we'll come back to it right after.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you for taking the time, and I know it's not easy, and I know what your time is like. And I would encourage you, because for me, this really was fascinating, because as a teacher, a lot of the things I just taught you about strategies, I already knew, but I actually didn't know nearly as much about trauma and anxiety as I learned in preparing for this. There's lots of information, current information out there that really talk about trauma and anxiety in kids. And I think in today's day and age, even right now, what we have going on creates, with the virus even, just creates a scary world. And we have seen in the last 15 years, so many scary things that could easily cause trauma in kids, if not us. I hope that you can use the strategies, and I hope they're helpful. And if you're looking for more resources, I'm happy to share with you all the resources I had. Let me know. You can find me at, the easier way to find me is, just because you'll remember it better, is Trudy at biebercamp.com, which is BEBER. So it's like Justin Bieber without the I. biebercamp.com. But that's just the easier way. My email, Tiffy has my Gmail account. She can send me anything if you have a question. So please feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to help. This is really
So
fun.
my follow-up, and then we'll take Jen's, I'll turn this off and we'll take Jen's question. So first of all, thank you, Trudy. And I don't know if you guys know, but Trudy kind of stepped in at the last minute because we had a change. And so I'm so grateful to Trudy for doing this. And it was great. And we learned a lot. If you will send me the PowerPoint, then I will send the PowerPoint to all of you along with the evaluation of today and with an assignment so you can get your 2 LOMED credits. I didn't bring the list of classes with me tonight. I should have, but we still have more coming, and I'll attach it when I send you the assignments.
I will add to my PowerPoint, I'll add all the links to all the resources I have.
And I'm also going to send a link. Bader Hillel sent out today, and I really liked the letter about the coronavirus and what's going on, and had a link in there, which I haven't looked at yet, but I will, about talking to kids about the coronavirus and helping them deal with the stress of it. So I thought, once I look at it, make sure it's a good resource, which I'm assuming it is, I can attach that as well. I hope I will see all of you on March 15th at the Salute to Educators so that we can honor all of you right here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So thank you, Trudy. I'm going to turn this off and then we can have Jen's question.